Welcome to The Gut Show. I'm your host, Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gutivate. I'm also your fellow IBS warrior. Our goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their gut better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and to make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season, you can expect a conversation around a hot topic related to gut health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I am not your dietitian. So everything covered in this episode is meant to be educational and is purely information that you can take back to your healthcare team in order to make the best decisions for you. If you're new here and something just doesn't feel right in your gut, if your symptoms have led you to this podcast, I invite you to start by taking the quiz, What's Your Poop Personality? Your personality type will unveil what your symptoms may mean, what may be causing them, and what you can do about them. This is a free quiz and you can take it today at gutivate.com or find the direct link below in the show notes. While you're going to take the quiz, let's jump into today's episode. Wondered what actually happens in your gut and in your body between meals? And could there be a value in spacing your meals or doing something in between meals to actually aid in digestion and improve symptoms? If you've heard about this, if you've heard tips about this, if you've heard whatever it may be out there about this, today's episode is going to break down what goes on in the gut between digestion and what is the proper amount of meal spacing that you want in order to have the best digestion and best motility possible. Now, we're going to talk about motility quite a bit today, so I want to break down what that actually means. Gut motility simply refers to the movement of contents throughout the GI tract, utilizing the muscles of the GI tract. So from your mouth all the way to your anus, you have a bunch of muscle tubes, if you will, connected to these different organs. So you have your mouth, your esophagus, which is all muscle. Then you have your stomach, which is muscle as well. And then your stomach empties into your small intestine. It's a big long tube of smooth muscle. And then your small intestine goes into your large intestine, which is just a wider tube of muscle. Again, smooth muscle on the outside, but fully round and circular, meaning food moves through it. And then the muscle contractions move food, poop, water, everything along until it empties out of your rectum and anal sphincter. So that is what we refer to as motility, is how things are moving through your digestive system. If you have hypermotility, that means things are moving too fast, typically caused by the body trying to clear something out, like an infection or malabsorption, or just too fast of movement of the muscles, which can be like cramping, spasms, which we typically see with diarrhea. Now, hypomotility is where things are not moving fast enough, so they're moving too slow. This is what we see with constipation, and this can be due to things getting stuck, the muscles themselves not moving properly, the nerves inside of the GI tract not communicating properly to get that muscle moving, or just inefficiency of digestion throughout the process, which would just slow things down. You can also have hypomotility throughout the entire GI tract if you're not emptying the bottom end of the tube properly. So what we see with chronic constipation and even pelvic floor defecatory disorders. So too fast, too slow, not great. We want efficient, healthy gut motility. Now, when we are looking at what's going on between meals, the movement of contents throughout the digestive organs in that digestive tract is really important, because not only is each step of the process really valuable for digestion, you break down food in your mouth, you have stomach acid and the enzyme breaking down some of your proteins in your stomach. You're also kind of churning and breaking down the size of your food in your stomach. In your small intestine, you're going to break down the majority of your nutrients, carbs, fats, and proteins, and also pull out your micronutrients. This is where you're going to absorb most of your nutrients that you need. You also break down fats. And then we take all that waste and then fiber, which is not digested, take that into the colon and you feed gut microbes with your fiber, but then you form poop with everything else. So every single step of the process is really important. And how food moves through that system and the pace at which it moves through that system can impact how these functions are happening, meaning, are you absorbing, breaking things down as well as possible, and vice versa. If digestion, something is off, you don't have good stomach acid production, you're missing some of your enzymes, maybe food is just way too large or not meant to be broken down and causing some disruption with what should be happening, that can impact gut motility. So it's really important. Not only is your actual digestion process impacted by your gut motility, but you're also going to notice symptoms related to gut motility. So I mentioned, diarrhea and constipation on the ends of the spectrum of how fast or how slow food's actually moving through your gut. But something else to consider is gas buildup and bloat. If things are moving too quickly, you may end up with more gas production because food is not being broken down properly, and then it's going into the colon, and your gut microbes are kind of going crazy on things they shouldn't have access to. So that could be an option. Bloating as well. If food goes into the colon, not digested properly, your body's going to pull water into the colon and kind of flush it out, which is going to cause bloat and distension and discomfort. Now, on the hypo side, if things are moving too slow, gas should be produced throughout the digestion process, but this gas is going to build up in certain areas and get stuck because it's not moving efficiently. That can lead to bloating, distension, and that trapped gas pain that many of you may be dealing with. So there can be issues with your motility that also impact the symptoms that you have on a day-to-day basis, and also your overall nutrition and how you feel. So this is really important. So I bring this up, and I wanted to lay the groundwork with motility because one major thing that happens between meals, ideally, is a pattern of muscle activity that supports your gut motility. And that is what we call the migrating motor complex, or the MMC, as you may see it written out. Now, the migrating motor complex is a mechanism that refers to the periodic mobility pattern that occurs in the upper GI tract, including the stomach and the small intestine, during a fasted state. So what that means is that the muscles, whenever food's moving or anything's moving, your muscles contract and release and contract and release and contract and release, kind of like a worm, like inching along on the ground. It's contract and release. That's what your gut is doing. Now, the migrating motor complex is kind of a faster 4-phase like cycle of movement. So not necessarily trying to move something specifically, but it's a cycle of movement when you're not eating any food to help clear out what might have been left over from digestion. So we like to kind of refer to this as the housekeeper of the small intestine, because the patterns are going to clear out food particles and even possibly gas, whatever's left along from the small intestine, and send it into the large intestine to be part of the waste process. This is really important because if you have like food particles or things left over in the small intestine, they should already be in the large intestine, so that can cause some distension and like heightened sensations in the small intestine. This can also contribute to gas buildup and microbial overgrowth in the small intestine. So we have microbes from our mouth to anus as well. Even on our skin, we are more microbes than we are human, truly. They are part of our being, and we are their host most of the time. So your microbes are going to be throughout the whole gut, but the majority of your gut microbes are in your colon, your large intestine, because that's where fiber is going to be available. That's their food of choice. That's where they're having their most activity. You do have some microbes in the small intestine, and that is normal. However, you don't want too many in the small intestine, because too many microbes, especially if they are more pathogenic microbes, they are going to feed on fiber, sugars, things that they should not have access to or have access to yet, like what we see in fiber, and they're going to produce an excess amount of gas in the small intestine where it's not really meant to be. So this can lead to distension, pain, discomfort, all of that. They also can contribute to other issues if they are pathogenic microbes and they're feeding on your carbohydrate sources that you should be absorbing, not necessarily feeding microbes with, right? So that can become problematic. So we want this housekeeper kind of activity to, one, just help kind of clear things out and keep things moving along, which is going to help support overall gut motility and constipation. But this is also going to help prevent, ideally, some bacterial overgrowth or excess gas production in the small intestine, which will lead to more symptoms. So that's the value of this migrating motor complex. The important thing to note here is that this activity, as we go through these phases, only happens when you are fasted, meaning not eating. If food and calories are coming in, that can disrupt this pattern. Now, the question typically is, well, how much food is necessary to disrupt it? There's not a lot of great data on that on humans, which is why when I go through the different phases and talk about the length of these phases, it can vary greatly between people, and we don't necessarily have a way of studying your migrating motor complex fully yet. So it's hard to know, but enough of like a snack or just I like to think about calories. Like a cup of coffee, probably not. That's, a black cup of coffee is likely less than 10 to 20 calories, very, very low. But something that's like 50 to 100 calories is definitely going to disrupt this pattern. And I'll talk about more practical, like how to approach this with meals. So don't worry, don't stress. You can eat food between meals if you need to. There's a way of using this tool without getting too obsessed over it. But I just wanted to make it clear as we get into what this pattern looks like. It's only going to happen when you're not eating. And the most of it is going to happen when you're sleeping because you're naturally not eating whenever you sleep. But in between meals, you're also not eating. And that would be considered that fasted state. So you have 4 phases of the migrating motor complex. For phase 1, that's no contractions present. So that is the gut maybe right after you eat. Like food has moved through, there's nothing happening. Are you listening to today's episode with the main thought being, what are the steps that I can take to get rid of my symptoms right now? While I hope that the information that we share in every episode of The Gut Show leaves you feeling more empowered and more confident in your body, it's not always going to solve your problem or give you a clear direction for your specific symptoms and your needs. The Master Method membership is an online program for the person with chronic digestive symptoms and IBS who wants step-by-step guidance to understand their body, address the drivers of IBS, reduce symptoms, and build resilience in your gut long-term. This membership includes a step-by-step course and a dietitian-led community that teaches you how to holistically address each symptom and the IBS drivers, how to reduce symptoms more strategically and with confidence, and guidelines for better gut health long-term so that you're not only thinking about today, but you're also improving your outcomes in the future. It is time to ditch the symptoms and get your life back. The membership is your first step. You can learn more and enroll at ibsmastermethod.com and use the code GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW, GUTSHOW for $25 off your enrollment fee. Now, let's get back to today's episode. Phase 2, contractions are present, but the interval between the contractions is more irregular. So it's kind of like it's gearing up, starting up, but not like running smoothly yet. Now, phase 3 is the most active and powerful phase. And this is where in the stomach, you have about 2 to 3 contractions per minute. And in the small intestine, you have 11 to 12 contractions per minute. And they're a bit more rhythmic. So this is where it's running smoothly, it's in its rhythm and flow. And then phase 4 mimics phase 2, where there is more irregularity. And then we go back to phase 1. So no contractions, irregular contractions, regular, moving smoothly, active, irregular, back to none. And this will cycle through as long as you are fasted. So you'll cycle through these phases. After phase 4 ends, phase 1 begins again, unless it's disrupted by food intake or your next meal. And then the length can vary highly between individuals and can vary on a day-to-day basis. So there's not like a single set amount of time that this is perfectly happening, but it can range between 113 to 230 minutes. So around like 2 to 4 hours, depending on the person, you will get one of these cycles. Some people do believe it to be closer to 90 to 120, so an hour and a half to 2 hours, but no one fully knows. But again, somewhere in that range is where you're going to get these cycles. Now, with this, again, you're going to get many of these cycles overnight. Between meals, you may only get 1 to 2 of these cycles. But what tends to happen is if you disrupt these cycles by grazing all day, snacking all day, consuming food and like a higher caloric beverage, food, a higher caloric beverage, and just kind of cycling through food and liquids, and you're constantly feeding your gut, then you may not get any of these cycles at all. So this can lead to that excess gas production, that overgrowth, sluggish motility. It may lead to more symptoms later on, which is what people experience. Then overnight, you do get the cycles. You wake up, maybe you feel a little bit better. You use the bathroom, you feel great, you move on, and this kind of repeats throughout the day. So that would be a sign to look for that maybe these cycles aren't working in your favor, and spacing meals out and finding some fasted periods between meals can be helpful. Now, when we look at the range of time that these patterns are happening, again, this might be anywhere between 1.5 to 4 hours. So we typically recommend around 3 hours between meals, because this might give you, at least one cycle, but maybe even two. So 3 to 5 hours is what's recommended. I would say practically 5 hours is a really long period of time. Like some people get that between lunch and dinner, just naturally based on your hunger cues, the balance of your meals, the size of your meals, your caloric needs. But for a lot of people, 5 hours is a long time, but 3 hours is more practical and it is more doable. So that's what I typically would recommend, especially to start. Now, this is where that personalization comes into play, because if you're not able to eat a large amount of calories at one meal and you have to split your meals up, so you're eating maybe 5 meals a day versus just solid 3 meals a day, you may not get this spacing perfectly between every meal. You can plan for it and try to aim for it, but you may not get it every meal, and that's okay. It is more important for you to meet your nutrition needs. Remember, that is foundational. Your gut's not going to work at all if you're not even meeting your nutrition needs, you're not eating enough. And so we want to do that first before we implement this tool and lean more into this migrating motor complex, like muscle movement. Now, that is what we want to consider. What we also want to consider is how your hunger will always trump a schedule. If you are hungry, because your nutrition needs, your caloric needs are going to vary day to day, they can depend on your exercise that day. They may impact on your exercise that week, the energy needs you have due to other things, like even changes throughout your menstrual cycle or what else your body is kind of going through, whatever stress it may be under, how much sleep you got or didn't sleep. You are going to need a different amount of calories or nutrition or food intake each day. So your hunger cues, when you're eating enough already, your hunger cues are going to guide you to hopefully meet those needs. Now, the balance of your meals and what you're choosing do play a role for sure, and that's something you can work with a dietitian one-to-one. We can help you with that in our programs, especially if you have digestion symptoms and GI conditions. But your hunger cues are still very important, and we always want to honor them. So if you are making it a goal to space your meals around maybe 3 to 4 hours apart, but you are hungry and starving, but it hasn't been 3 hours, please eat. If you are getting this activity overnight and at least 1 to 2 times during the day, maybe between an afternoon snack and dinner or your breakfast and your lunch, that is enough. You do not have to get this perfect between every meal and every snack, because if you do, and that's the only way you manage symptoms, there may be more going on. You do not have to. It is not expected that that is your need, right? So there's some personalization that you can have here, but play around with it and see, okay, where in your schedule, based on your intake and based on your hunger and fullness cues, could you fit this in and kind of play with it a bit? A tip that I have for this is to try to pair higher caloric like drinks and desserts closer to your meal versus spread apart. So if you're like me, I love a piece of chocolate after meals, lunch and dinner sometimes, especially working from home. Like I like a good piece of chocolate. Instead of me eating that chocolate an hour or 2 hours after I ate my lunch or my dinner, if I follow it with that snack, then I might be able to space out between that snack and the next meal, or go into overnight and get into these patterns without interrupting them. So that's an example. The same is true of like higher caloric drinks. So if you're drinking like a soda in the afternoon, or you're someone who loves, a coffee with milk or cream or whatever it may be, a latte, then put that with your meal. So have that kind of alongside breakfast, or eat breakfast and follow it with the coffee drink, and then have your spacing versus pushing it an hour or two out. What can also be helpful is to consider how long it takes you to consume something that might have more calories to it. A latte is a great example of this. If you're drinking it over 2 hours of time, then you're going to kind of constantly be feeding this. So that's something that is also important to kind of know is how long does it take you to eat, because that's going to interrupt these cycles and limit how much time you would have in between. So even kind of putting more attention to your meal times and those extra drinks that may be high enough in nutrition to then impact the cycle, pairing it with your meals and to then give you more space can be really helpful. So when can this go wrong outside of your actions, right? Meal spacing is one piece of the cycle, and being fasted versus interrupting the fasted state is within your control in a bit to impact these cycles. But these cycles can also be interrupted by different things that maybe are outside of your control that are going on in your body. One can be kind of a hormone component. This migrating motor complex, like most activity in your body, has a hormonal regulator. Hormones are kind of like messengers. I like to consider them sort of like the office manager that's keeping everybody on track, like kind of checking in, making sure things are running smoothly, communicating between departments. That is what our hormones do. And so we do have one called Motility, which is a gastroprokinetic hormone, meaning stimulates movement throughout the stomach and the upper GI tract. And Motility is produced by some hormonal or endocrine cells in the proximal small intestine, and they peak just before phase 3 of the migrating motor complex begins. So if for some reason you are not producing Motility correctly, or there's some sort of hormonal component here messing with this, that could impact these cycles. Damage to the small intestine might actually impact these cycles, which would impact muscle movement as well. So that could be something that's going on. And then there could be something related to constipation and motility that then negatively impacts the cycle too. Just like how this migrating motor complex, if you're not getting these cycles, they may cause slower motility, sluggishness, bacterial overgrowth, constipation. The same might be true in reverse, where having bacterial overgrowth and constipation, slow motility, even if that's due to nerve damage, opioid-induced constipation, that could mess with these cycles as well. So there might be this kind of inverse relationship between the two that's helpful to understand if you're putting together your entire medical history and some of the problems you're seeing, like recurrent SIBO or just excess gas production. This would be something to consider. Now, if meal spacing is not enough and it seems like your migrating motor complex needs even more help and more support, which again, we're not really going to be able to measure. So this is something that would be assessed a little bit more in a personalized way by a dietitian or a provider that works in the space more often and knows like how you should be responding to interventions and just taking into mind the whole symptom pattern that you're experiencing. But if the migrating motor complex function does need extra support, a prokinetic agent could be helpful, and this is something that's going to help improve movement. That's prokinetic, improve movement. There are medications that do this. There are also supplements that do this. And there are certain foods that even have this kind of prokinetic activity to them, like ginger, as we've talked about on the podcast this season. That's one example. And some of the supplements on the market have ginger in them to give you that pro-motility effect. There are some other ones as well, and those might be considered on a case-by-case basis, especially in those who do have chronic constipation or recurrent SIBO or IMO. That might be something to consider. I will say, just like I said in the ginger episode, that supplemental ginger is not always safe and always right for every person. And so you don't want to take these prokinetic drugs or supplements without really consulting your healthcare team fully to make sure that they're right for you, because they could do more harm that causes more issues than this would even help. So we always have to weigh out the risks and the benefits alongside your medical history to determine what might be the right fit for you. And again, that is something that we do for our clients at Gutivate. We are a team of dietitians. We're all specialized in GI. We work with clients every day that have complex needs and a complex medical history to personalize recommendations based on what we understand about the body and what we know can help. So if you're interested in that, the show notes always has information on our programs. We would love to chat with you and see if it would be a good fit. I hope today's episode was interesting and enlightening. I will say, this is something that has gotten a lot of attention as SIBO research and SIBO awareness has grown. And so I'm excited to see that. I will say sometimes it gets a little too much attention. So I'll leave you with that last final reminder that more fasting is not always better. You don't have to do more, do more, do more, because if you're not meeting your nutrition needs, that can be problematic and not you'll see no benefit. But also this is not meant to be about 100% perfection, and you are not going to be doing harm by interrupting these cycles because of hunger or other needs or scheduling or whatever it may be. It's not meant to be perfect. The idea is that you implement this spacing to support this muscle activity as much as you can, but it does not have to be every single snack, every single meal. Use it as a tool that can help you and support you, not as a rule that's going to have control over your life. Remember that. That's true of every tip that we give here. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you do give this a try, or if you have experienced this, or you found ways to make this work really well for you, whatever it may be, let us know. You can join our Facebook community. I also am most active on Instagram. So if you want to share, tag me. I would love to hear that and continue the conversation with you. And then I'll meet you back here next week as we talk a little bit more about the immune system, immunity, as we are deep into cold flu season. How do we support our immune system, and especially with IBS and disorders of the gut in mind?